Today's gospel is a gospel of polar opposites. It starts with a group of Jews who are going to gather stones in order to stone and kill Jesus. It is the ultimate rejection of Christ and his word to them. But then by the end of the gospel, we have turned 180 degrees and we are now heading in the exact opposite direction. Jesus finds himself on the other side of the Jordan with a group of John's disciples, and they have embraced and welcomed him, and they have actually become his followers. This really, when you think about it, is probably the story of every Christian's evangelistic efforts. And it's very reminiscent of the parable of the sower, where seed is thrown out onto various different types of soil, and some of it lands on rocky, hard ground and nothing grows. Where other seed is thrown onto fertile ground and great fruit comes of it. This really is the story of our evangelistic efforts. Sometimes we will encounter people whose hardness of heart is such that they just aren't even listening to what we have to say. There is this total rejection of the gospel. And this many times throughout history, and even today, is still going on, even to the point where Christians are being killed. People are willing to kill Christians for daring to speak the truth. But then there are other times when we encounter people where there is a fertile soil. Their hearts and their minds are open to hearing. They are searching. There is an openness there. There is something there that predisposes them to hearing and to responding favourably to the Word of God. This is the story of our Christian life, or it should be the evangelism that we're engaging in. But it's also marked again by those two distinct polar opposites: pride and humility. And it's a trap that all of us can fall into. The moment we slip into those patterns of pride is the moment that the soil of our hearts becomes hard and infertile. The seed cannot take. But when we live in a state of humility, when we open ourselves to humility, that is when the soil in our hearts becomes fertile and great fruit comes of it. Today's saint quote of the day comes from Saint Thomas Aquinas, and he said this: "To one who has faith, no explanation is necessary. To one without faith, no explanation is possible." And to me, this sums up perfectly the two different polar opposite groups that we encounter in today's gospel. At the one end of the spectrum, and at the very last phase of today's gospel, we see the disciples of John, who welcome Jesus, who have faith that he is the one who John has promised would come into their midst. They embrace, they welcome, they become his followers. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Jewish leaders in the temple, who Jesus spends a lot of time with, trying to explain and unpack and present to them why he is the chosen one, but they won't have a bar of it. Their pride gets in the way. They don't have faith that God is actually working here in their midst through the man standing in front of them, who is both fully man and fully God. They just cannot accept it. Now, lest we be tempted to think, well, thank goodness we're not like the Pharisees. In actual fact, that same temptation still exists today for all of us. That is the temptation to look upon something that God is doing and to miss what the actual hand of God at work in our midst, because of the fact that our own pride is getting in the way. And we are thinking that we know how God would work, and we have a plan, and we have an understanding, and we've got it all figured out, and we know what God's going to do, and we know what he's not going to do. And so when God surprises us and does something perhaps that we weren't expecting, or perhaps even sin becomes so ingrained in our lives that their pride starts to well up and we don't even want to see anymore, we develop a spiritual blindness. In those situations, we've become just like the Pharisees, and we have failed to recognize the call. We have failed to recognize the work of God that is happening in our very midst.